Thank you. So my name's Anthony Cuthbertson. I'm a reporter at Newsweek, and I lead their coverage of technology, both online and for the magazine, but predominantly online. And I'm here, I was invited here to speak because I won AOP's Digital Journalist of the Year award earlier this year. And that was for my work both at Newsweek, but also before that I was at the International Business Times, where I worked for 2 years as a technology reporter. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the work I did to win the award, generally what it's like to be a journalist in this hyper-connected world, and look a bit towards the future at trends and other things. So what makes good content? According to the AOP judges, it ranges everything from digging around the dark web in investigations to drinking nothing but green goo for a week, which is what I did sometime last year. That in my hand is ambronite, and I lived off that and nothing else for a week, drinking it, didn't eat any food. And this was a story that worked well in many ways. The first one, you could share it on many platforms. You could make a video from it. We did blogging, and obviously the written article and a mini documentary. But also its reach on social. This was for the International Business Times, and they don't get a lot of native readers. People don't go to the site to find stories there. They normally pick up their readers through Facebook or trending stories. So this worked well there, and I can tell that was day 7 in that video. The cat food behind me was more appetizing than that goo by that stage. The next story that was recognized by the judges was the investigation I did into this social media war machine by ISIS. This was several months' work looking at data and other things, but also speaking with so-called hacktivists who I worked with this database that collated all the accounts, the Twitter accounts, and Telegram accounts and Facebook accounts that were being used by the Islamic State and their supporters to spread propaganda and as a recruitment tool. So this did well, but it actually, a bit later on, several months later, I was still following some of these accounts when I noticed many of them were posting gay pride messages, and it turned out that it was in the wake of the Orlando attacks, and I managed to track down the hacker that was taking control of these ISIS Twitter accounts, and he said yes, he was doing it sort of to show support for the victims in solidarity. And this, it wasn't a story I had been following, Orlando, I'd been following it but not covering, but it gave me an angle, and this story went viral. I think it sort of touched a nerve with people, and it's one of the most viewed articles on Newsweek.com to this date, and it was picked up by over 100 publications around the world, which is another one. The final story I want to talk about is the Immortality Bus. This is, the man on the left there is Zoltan Istvan, who is running for president. He'll actually be hoping a few people vote for him today. He is the leader of the Transhumanist Party, and he was campaigning around America on his campaign bus, which was shaped like a coffin, and his message was that if you vote for me, I'll help you live forever. The man on his right is, so I spent a week on his bus, traveling from Florida up to Washington, going around on his campaign trail. And the man on his right is John McAfee, who some of you might know is for the McAfee antivirus that he created. He was also running for president for the Libertarian Party, and I'd been doing some work with him, cybersecurity work, and I invited him along for the bus ride, and we ended up having a great informal debate with sort of third-party candidates. And that was while I was at International Business Times, and it was these sorts of stories that did very well for us. We weren't going to be invited onto the campaign buses of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, but there were other ways we could cover this campaign that would do well with our readers and that worked for us. it's really just about using every tool at your disposal to find stories, to research them, and ultimately present them in a way that gets the most enjoyment and engagement from your reader. So then moving over to Newsweek, it's a lot more high profile. People tend to know who you're writing for. And it was a very different scenario to writing for IB Times. Looking for these emerging trends is what I was forced to do and was what I continue to do. I think it's good practice anyway. This is the Gartner hype cycle. They release it every year. It's their predictions of what's going to be the next big thing. For me, as a technology reporter, it's always interesting to see. This was 2016. You can see cryptocurrencies are sort of on the wane, but quantum computing is going to be a very big thing. AI is up there somewhere. Right at the bottom, smart dust. I don't know what's going to become of that. I'm not even quite sure what it is. But it's a great way of picking these stories at the bottom and that are emerging. Quantum computing is something I'm writing a lot about at the moment, which then infiltrate themselves into the broader world and the landscape, and you have the contents from the ground up that you can work with. So the future of investigative journalism as well is something I wanted to talk about. I wrote my master's thesis on the future of investigative journalism, and it is something I could probably talk about for hours.
Not today.
Not today. I'm going to only mention one example, which was the death of investigative journalism, firstly, was first predicted in 1954 with the advent of commercial television. Since then, it's got even more death sentences since the advent of online. But there are some companies who are doing great investigations and some unexpected ones, like BuzzFeed, for example. They're known for their listicles and their viral content that they create. But they've made some high-profile acquisitions, some great investigative reporters, and they did a 15-month investigation into gambling in tennis. They created this tennis racket article, which did well, but it was the way they followed up with it that was interesting. BuzzFeed turned it into a BuzzFeed-type story. They did a live blog of the world reacting to it. They did lists of who's been involved, and they created about a week's worth of content from this one investigation. And some of these follow-up stories did just as well in terms of traffic and reach as the original. So I think that could be a model to look forward to in the future. Talking of the future, I want to talk briefly about AI. And I know some people talked about this yesterday. I wasn't here, so I hope I don't cover the same sort of things. But as a reporter, we're not facing competition now from just other human reporters, but robots who are now writing stories. I think it started with the LA Times, who did an earthquake report that was entirely written by an algorithm. Now there's financial reports. The Financial Times, this journalist, Sarah O'Connor, competed against a robot to write a story, and she wasn't as quick, but she was probably a bit better. But it was very hard to tell. At the bottom, it had the two reports, one written by the robot, one written by her, and it was very difficult to tell the two apart. So I think AI coming into journalism is fantastic, and I think all publications should be looking towards it. It gets rid of all the grunt work. It just means that reporters are going to need to maybe retrain or learn skills that make them a bit future-proof. And their ultimate weapon is their own humanity, and to be able to tell stories in a human way that relates to them and to then share it with their reader through social media or however, and really interact more with their readers, and maybe publications can do that. Another trend that I'm quite excited by is virtual reality. So the New York Times are really pioneering this. They were the first publication to have their own VR editor, and they went on to hand out these Google Cardboard devices to all their subscribers. And now, I think just 1 month or 2 months, maybe in September, they acquired a VR agency. So they're really going all in on this. And it's something that I know IB Times are looking at. Our editor-in-chief is really keen on getting, just understanding really what we can do with VR, and it's a new way of telling stories. New York Times, their election coverage with virtual reality has been fantastic, going to campaign rallies and stuff. So yeah, that's about my time here. And yeah, so thank you for your time, and if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, and indeed I do have actually dozens of questions, but one will have to suffice.
Okay.
At the risk of making you get your master's thesis out, and I agree I'm taking a risk by encouraging you, what does your master's thesis tell you about whether AI can ever conduct investigative journalism?
That's a good question. I actually wrote the thesis maybe 4 years ago now, so AI in journalism hadn't even really been thought of back then.
Very good point. Now then, use your judgment. Can AI ever be turned into investigative journalism as opposed to acute assembly of facts?
I think what we're going to be seeing in the near future is, firstly, them writing reports, breaking news, sports reports.
They're already doing that.
They're already doing that. Press Association are experimenting with it at the moment.
And papers in Holland. The Dutch news agency is doing the same.
But I think in terms of investigations, then reporters, journalists themselves, will be using artificial intelligence to scrape data.
Data generated. I was thinking of the BuzzFeed. Could AI actually identify dodgy patterns of betting?
Exactly. And I think more publications these days, IBT has just hired a data journalist, and I think Newsweek are following in their footsteps. But these data journalists are looking how they can use AI and algorithms to improve investigations. So yes, maybe not them writing it by themselves, but they will be becoming more involved in these investigations.
Anthony, you said you were 30. I've got one hope for you, that you survive as a journalist long enough to get a pension, and that you're not pensioned off by dreadful robots. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, you and me both.